Today we're looking at a book on the use of the guard for mixed martial arts, and it's written by an expert on that subject. Hi guys, my name is Joe and welcome to Fighting Words, the martial arts library. On this channel I review martial arts books and talk about other martial arts related subjects. The subject for today's review is Mastering Mixed Martial Arts, The Guard, originally published in 2007. The authors are Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, Glenn Cordoza, and Eric Kraus. Mr. Nogueira was a high-level mixed martial arts fighter. He was the only man to hold the heavyweight title in both Pride Fighting Championships as well as the Ultimate Fighting Championships, the UFC. He was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt known for his guard work and submission tactics, which is why it's appropriate that he wrote this book. Glenn Cordoza and Eric Kraus are both prolific writers, and they both have a background in Muay Thai. And I sort of hate to lump two guys in the same sentence, but I've covered them here before. They actually co-wrote a lot of books for the publisher of this title, which was Victory Belt. Now, we start off with a biographical section from Mr. Nogueira, since he's the one featured in this book. This goes back to his childhood and famous accident where he was actually run over by a garbage truck and spent days, weeks in the hospital. And then he decided he was going to be the best fighter in the world, and for a brief time, he could have made that argument. The book also highlights his rivalry with Fedor Emelianenko that they had in Pride, and at the time that the book was written, he had just won the UFC Heavyweight Championship. Before the book really gets into the technique section, Nogueira goes over his principles for the guard, which basically come down to constant movement and constant attack. He notes that you don't want to be passive there, and notes that that was a failure of some of the earlier guard players in mixed martial arts. The book itself, being published by Victory Belt, follows a lot of the same patterns. So we get color photos. Almost always we get a single technique from multiple angles. We get color-coded chapters. In other words, the corner of the pages of the chapter are given a certain color, whether it's red or yellow, in order to indicate this is the section on closed guard, and this is the section on half guard. Each section begins with an overall descriptor of the principles involved in what we're going to get into with that chapter, and that's followed by the techniques for the chapter, which begin with a paragraph or two just describing the overall reason why you would use this technique, followed by step-by-step instructions accompanied by the photographs from multiple angles. In the first section of this book, Mr. Nogueira goes over posture control. So basically, breaking the opponent down and using certain upper body grips in conjunction with lower body positions to set your opponent up for a series of attacks. In this section, we get three different classifications. We get closed guard, we get sit-up guard, where he's actually sitting on his hip as he's beginning these attacks, and we get open guard, where instead of having his legs locked around his opponent's waist, he has his knees controlling his opponent's arms and his feet controlling his opponent's hips. Beginning with this section, and it's something we see throughout the book, the author will focus on a set series of attacks, like this is your A move, this is the thing you're aiming for. Your opponent has 2 or 3 ways to react to this. If he reacts in this way, this is the next thing that you do. It's also notable in this section that a lot of the open guard portion in this posture control section focuses on attacking with an omoplata, which is a shoulder lock using the legs, and then based on your opponent's reactions to that, executing things that are either further submission holds or taking the back or getting mount. It's actually a strong emphasis that Mr. Nogueira has in this book, is using these positions not just to attack, but to also transition into better positions like back control or mount. I do like this section on posture control. A lot of how he shows how to enter into those postures come out of defending ground and pound. In other words, the opponent punches, he shows how to defend that, and then from that defense begin to work your attacks. After that, we get a shorter section on double wrist control or double arm control. The double wrist control is used from closed guard. The double arm control is used from open guard. This is for, as Nogueira points out, when your opponent realizes that they can't really open up so much, so they start getting more defensive and just pushing down on your hips. In this section, the closed guard uses double wrist control, and Nogueira tends to transition into the triangle choke and further attacks and transitions from there, including a transition and a mount. Whereas from the double arm control from open guard, he really focuses on taking the back from that position using things like arm drags. Also in this section, he will show details once you've actually gotten to the back on how to finish a choke from there. Following that is a brief section on what he calls inside hooks guard, which many of us will be familiar with as butterfly guard. And unsurprisingly, this one is about sweeps. So using your opponent's momentum and your leg position inside of his hips in order to get a reversal, to throw him onto his back and achieve a top position. Following that is an extensive half guard section. So for those unfamiliar, half guard is when you have one of your opponent's legs trapped between your legs as opposed to the opponent's waist. Essentially, you are halfway toward the full guard position. From here, Nogueira shows primarily sweeps and transitions from two main positions. One of those is having an underhook, in other words, going underneath your opponent's arm and clasping his shoulder or his waist. And the other is from a cross-face and hip control position when you're more flattened out, but you keep your opponent from pressuring into you by driving your forearm across his face and controlling his hip with your forearm. Again, most of the section is on sweeps, the reversals. There are some transitions to back control. There are also a few submission options. And he actually shows in his troubleshooting section how to prevent someone from passing your half guard. The final chapter is on downed guard. So you are down, your opponent is standing over you. He shows how to defend ground and pound. All of his main techniques in this section are on how to sweep from there, and he follows up all of these sweeps, in other words, dumping his opponent onto his back and coming up on top. He finishes all of those with punching attacks of his own. As far as the pros go, as with nearly all the Victory Belt books, this has a great format to it. And again, you can follow along. If you want to get from one chapter to the next, instead of just flipping through randomly or going back to the table of contents, just thumb through till the corner of the page changes color. Like, oh, this is the next chapter then, because we went from blue to green, or green to red, or what have you. Having the color photos from multiple angles also helps. As far as the content goes, it's very succinct and very formulaic. In other words, as I mentioned before, we go from this is your A move. If that doesn't work, your opponent's going to do one of two things. If they do this, then this is your next move in the sequence. And this gives someone a formula, a system, to address this position and the most common opponent reactions from this position. So instead of having to learn 50,000 things, you learn one thing and like two other things that are related to it. You do that like 5 times. It's also notable that, again, as I mentioned up top, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira was known for being able to use his guard against some of the best fighters in the world. He has the experience of using this stuff at a high level. As far as the cons go, I wouldn't even really call it a con. I think the book could have been improved if we had seen transitions from bad positions into guard or half guard. Those of us who've done training know that guard just doesn't appear out of nowhere, and if you're up against someone who's a competent grappler, there's a good chance that they're going to be trying to pass your guard the whole time. The book does what it says on the cover, but I think it could have been improved if we had seen transitions out of bad positions, like being underneath mount, underneath side control, maybe escaping a back position and then getting into guard or half guard from there. As far as recommendations go, if you're doing mixed martial arts or something similar, I think this has a lot of application for that, especially if perhaps you don't have very strong takedown defense. This might be a good reference to have. I think even if you were not doing something with strikes included, there are a lot of things here that would help for instance, no-gi jiu-jitsu or no-gi grappling. I think there are some good self-defense ideas here. One of the worst positions you can find yourself in is on the ground with somebody trying to dribble your skull off of the pavement with punches. So there are definitely some ideas in here that can help prevent that situation from happening and can give you some options to escape from there. Thank you for following along. That's all I have for this week. If you guys would like to help out the channel, or if you have a request for a book for me to cover, please consider donating to my Ko-fi account. I am taking commissions through there. And I'll see you guys around.